Chris Stevens.
Well, thank you, Mr Stringer. It's a pleasure to see you in the chair, and as someone who the House of Commons Library tells me the Glasgow South West constituency has the highest percentage of workers in public sector employment, I think it's only fitting that I contribute to this debate, and I refer colleagues to the Register of Members' Interest. My position as PCS Parliamentary Group Chair, as someone who worked 25 years before arriving in this place in the public sector, and a proud trade unionist of 20 years trade union activity, and I would safely argue, Mr Stringer, the best political education and lifelong learning that one can achieve is being a trade union activist. I want to firstly thank the Honourable Member for Gower for leading the debate, and I use the word debate advisedly because we've not had anyone who has justified the government's position, as I'll come to. But I think the history that others have referred to is important, and that is that in 2010 there was a 2-year pay freeze, and then there was a 6-year pay cap of 1%, and indeed other departments maintained that pay cap. Public sector workers and civil servants have, during the last 9 months, performed heroics, and the general public, seem to think so too, with over 100,000 people signing this petition. Now, the point's been made, Mr Stringer, that the devolved administrations have provided pay for NHS staff of £500 as a thank you payment, and quite frankly we've seen a disgraceful response from the Treasury, who wish to take tax and national insurance off that particular payment, and I really do hope that the Treasury think again on that point. Now, I want to confine most of my remarks in relation to the civil service, Mr Stringer, and what they've done over the last 9 months, administering millions of new universal credit claims for the Department of Work and Pensions, processing furlough payments in HMRC, and that's all despite, and it has to be emphasised, not providing staff with the proper equipment to carry out home working during the COVID crisis, as we've seen in a number of departments, including the Department of Work and Pensions. Now, the point has been made by colleagues in relation to HMRC and the problems of low pay in that department, and I just want to emphasise again the point that the median salary in HMRC is the lowest across the civil service. Now, isn't that ironic, given that one of the key roles of HMRC is to chase all these rogues who are not paying their tax, the Googles, the Vodafones and all these other companies who have not been paying their tax for years, that the department chasing and trying to collect that tax has the lowest paid workers in the civil service, and around 1 in 5 are paid the minimum wage or just above it. But there's also another issue, and it's clear, Mr Stringer, that the pay delegation has also led to pay segregation by gender, and that the gender pay gap can only be reduced by increasing the pay of the lowest paid departments and agencies. Now, as I've said, Mr Stringer, it was perhaps really disappointing that not one government backbencher is here to justify the policy, and people watching this debate would have been wondering why the government hadn't thrown the towel in the middle of this debate. But I can tell you, Mr Stringer, PCS members have been sharing the emails they've received from government backbenchers to their request to not go ahead with this public sector pay freeze. Indeed, I think the politest term I've heard is short and sniffy responses, because it seems that the position of many of the government backbenchers is that public sector workers should be thankful for job security. Tory MPs could perhaps tell that to the 2,000 workers in HMRC facing redundancy at the end of the year, and knowing that vacancies within that department are not being offered to them, but are instead being farmed out to agency staff at God knows what cost to the taxpayer, or the over 100,000 civil servants who have lost their jobs in the last decade due to Tory austerity. Now, the Prime Minister did respond to me, as was emphasised by the Honourable Member for Gower, that the Prime Minister was lost in admiration for the work of the civil service during COVID. Well, I can only suggest that a pay freeze is an extraordinary way of showing it. And a public sector pay freeze is both counterproductive and economically illiterate. And it gets to the whole debate and role of the public sector itself. 70 pence in every pound of public money before the pandemic, consistent research showed that 70 pence in every pound of public money ends up in the private sector economy, whether that's grants, contracts, or indeed public sector workers' wages. We really need to end the notion that public sector workers, when they get a pay increase, hide it in a shoebox and place it under the mattress. That is not how it works, I can tell you, Mr Stringer, because what happens is when people get more money in their pockets, they spend it, and they spend it in the private sector. So if we're serious about helping the private sector, if we're serious about ensuring that the economic wheels turn, then surely it stands to reason that public sector workers, as a thanks for all the work that they've done over the last 9 months, should get a proper pay rise. And I hope that the Minister will tell us what progress is being made in ending the 200-plus bargaining units across Whitehall departments. I hope that this government, this political party of small government and efficiency, will tell us how they're going to enact that particular policy. We're already seeing, Mr Stringer, workers in Westminster departments moving to the departments of devolved administrations. Why? Because devolved administrations are paying better wages. There can be no return to the austerity programme, which has flatlined the economy. A public sector pay rise could start a post-pandemic recovery. Investment is now required in the civil service to reflect the changed circumstances in which we now find ourselves in. And I, Mr Stringer, and my colleagues in the SNP support the demands of the petition because it is morally just and it is economically sound.